A 22-year-old physics student with no medical degree and no clinical training walked into a university library one afternoon, sat down with a textbook meant for doctors, and in a few hours diagnosed a case that a room full of physicians had been unable to solve. The doctors he was about to embarrass had memorized every disease in their books. They could recite symptoms, name conditions, and write prescriptions. But when a patient arrived who didn't perfectly match the textbook description, their knowledge became useless. They didn't know how to think. They only knew how to recall. That physics student was Richard Feynman, and the patient was the woman he'd been in love with since he was 15. She was dying while the medical establishment argued over a diagnosis they would get wrong not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. This is the story of how a man with 0 medical training used nothing but logic and a library card to prove that the people we trust with our lives had memorized medicine but never truly understood it. It's a story that the medical profession decades later is only beginning to admit reveals a persistent, uncomfortable truth. Her name was Arlene Greenbaum. The first sign of trouble was a small lump on her neck. It would appear, then vanish, then reappear weeks later. Her uncle, a licensed physician, examined her and prescribed a simple remedy: rub it with oil. That was his professional medical opinion for what would eventually be revealed as a fatal disease. When her condition worsened, fevers, swelling, pain, a second doctor admitted her to the hospital and confidently declared it was typhoid fever. They placed her in full quarantine. Staff wore special gowns. The protocol was followed to the letter, but Feynman did what Feynman always did. He went to the source. He researched. He found that typhoid had a definitive diagnostic test, a procedure that gave a clear yes or no answer. So he approached the doctor with a simple question: what were the results of that test? The results of that specific diagnostic test were in, and they were negative. Feynman pressed him. If the test is negative, why the quarantine? Why the gowns? Why are you treating her for a disease your own data says she doesn't have? And the doctor didn't answer him. Instead, he went to Arlene's parents and complained. The family told Feynman to back off. After all, he was the doctor. You were just the fiancé. Think about what just happened. A test provided clear evidence. The doctor ignored it, and a young man with a library card called him out. Feynman later wrote that he learned such people don't know what they're doing and get insulted when you dare to make a suggestion. Arlene improved for a while. Then the swelling returned, this time in her armpits, her groin. Her lymph nodes were inflamed. A new doctor diagnosed a lymphatic disease. So Feynman walked into the Princeton University Library. He pulled every textbook he could find on lymphatic diseases and started reading from the beginning. The first entry was tuberculosis of the lymphatic glands. The book said it was very easy to diagnose. His logic was simple. If it were that easy, the doctors would have found it by now. So he ruled it out. That seemingly sound deduction would later be revealed as the most devastating mistake he ever made. He continued, he read about lymphadenoma, Hodgkin's disease, all cancers of the lymphatic system, and then he found a passage in the medical literature that made him stop cold. He later described it, noting that the only apparent difference between 2 of the listed diseases was whether the patient died. One name if they survived, another if they ended up in a coffin. 2 different names for what seemed to be the same disease, distinguished only by the outcome. This was the terminology being used to navigate life and death decisions. He concluded the most likely explanation was an incurable form of the disease. He mentioned this to Arlene, naming Hodgkin's specifically. When Arlene next saw her doctor and asked, could it be Hodgkin's? The doctor replied, well, yes, that's a possibility. Later, she was admitted to the county hospital, and the attending physician wrote on her chart, Hodgkin's disease, with a question mark. A trained physician wrote a question mark after his own diagnosis. A physics student reading the same textbooks in a library had arrived at the same level of certainty. The only difference was that the student didn't pretend to know more than he did. The doctor didn't know any more than I did about this problem, But the most revealing moment happened at a meeting that few people talk about. The hospital called a special session to discuss Arlene's case. After the meeting, a nurse wheeled Arlene into the hallway where Feynman was waiting. Then a small man came running out of the meeting room, out of breath. He caught up to them and asked Arlene a single pointed question. Tell me, do you ever spit up blood? Have you ever coughed up blood? The nurse immediately intervened. Go away, what kind of thing is that to ask a patient? She dismissed the one doctor who was actually right. And that Feynman later admitted, look, I didn't catch on. Coughing up blood was a textbook symptom of tuberculosis, the very disease Arlene actually had. The hospital settled on Hodgkin's disease. A doctor told Feynman, we're going to tell her it's glandular fever. They wanted to lie to her. What followed was an ambush. Her family and the doctors all told him he was a foolish young man who would destroy her by telling her the truth. He wrote Arlene a goodbye letter explaining that if she ever discovered he'd lied, their relationship would be over. He carried it everywhere. At the hospital, Arlene asked Richard, "Do I have Hodgkin's or glandular fever?" He said, "You have glandular fever," and he died inside. 1 week later, she asked again. This time he said, "You have Hodgkin's disease." He reached for the letter he'd written. Her first words weren't about dying. She said, "God, they must have put you through hell." She was worried about him. The final diagnosis, lymphatic tuberculosis, likely from unpasteurized milk. Every single doctor had gotten it wrong, every single one. She died on June 16th, 1945. When the clock in her room stopped, Feynman knew it wasn't a sign, it was just physics. He looked for the real answer. Years later at Princeton, he asked for a map of the cat for a biology presentation. The students laughed. They spent years memorizing what could be found in minutes. 4 years versus 15 minutes. Same facts. The difference, those students had memorized the map. Feynman understood the territory. In 1974, he named this pattern cargo cult science. Island tribes building runways of sticks, hoping planes would land because they had the look, but not the logic. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Memorizing answers is not the same as knowing. In 2026, medical journals are still citing his cargo cult metaphor to describe a replication crisis where peer-reviewed studies collapse upon inspection. A study of hundreds of health videos found that most had little to no scientific evidence, yet those with the weakest evidence were the most watched. Feynman said, "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. A credential is not the same thing as comprehension. Always ask why." In 1978, it happened to him. Cancer. Colleagues blamed the 1945 radiation, but Feynman refused the theory because the data wasn't strong enough. He wouldn't fool himself. In 1988, his kidneys failed. He refused dialysis. He understood the price of a few more months and decided it wasn't worth paying. His last words were quintessentially Feynman: "I'd hate to die twice. It's so boring." He died on February 15th, 1988. He never respected the system that left doctors helpless when patients didn't fit the mold. Understanding is always more important than just knowing. If you believe in understanding over knowing, subscribe to Winds of Thought. And remember, don't fool yourself. You're the easiest person to fool.